Hey, everybody. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back at you today with another discussion of a very important thought leaders helping guide us through these challenging times. Dr. Michael Mann, I'm sort of a big fan of his from afar. We've been Twitter friends, as we like to say these days in these wars, or what used to be Twitter friends, now Blue Sky friends, perhaps. But he is a director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. He's a best-selling author on books like Our Fragile Moment and The New Climate War. He was selected by Scientific American as one of the 50 leading visionaries in science and technology, and on and on and on. An unbelievably respected scientist who I have been following for a long time, but he wrote something recently, was involved in a book with Dr. Peter Hotez, which I thought was, when I originally reached out to him before the emergency of Doge and Trump sort of descended upon us, I reached out to him because this article really I felt was teaching me things that I didn't understand, and in the arguments that they've been making together as a pandemic scientist and as a climate scientist was really powerful to me. And so I wanted to bring him on today to share his thoughts both about the bigger picture arguments they've been making and then our particular moment. So Dr. Mann, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Simon, and right back at you. It's a real pleasure to be talking with you. You're a hero of mine.
Okay, well, listen, let's see how we do here together in the coming months. I want to live up to that. So listen, the article that you wrote was called Triple Threat to Humanity: Climate Change, Pandemics, and Anti-Science. Can you talk a little bit about the idea behind that?
Yeah, sure. So, for some time now, Peter Hotez and I have been talking about sort of our common experiences. He's a public health scientist, developed vaccines. He has been attacked by the anti-science right, the anti-vaxxers, the sort of conspiracy theorists when it comes to COVID-19, simply because he is promoting actual science. That makes him a threat to this entire enterprise, this sort of movement, this anti-science movement in the public health arena. Of course, I've been battling sort of my own sort of anti-science, battling against anti-science attacks for several decades now because of my work sort of establishing the sort of reality and threat of human-caused climate change. And so what was interesting to me is that the battles being fought by public health scientists over the past few years are sort of mirror the battles that we have been fighting for decades. And we saw sort of all of the tactics that had been deployed by bad actors in the assault on climate science over several decades literally be deployed over in months when the COVID-19 epidemic took hold. So Peter and I got to know each other well, and we realized that there was this very important commonality in the attacks that scientists like him find themselves under in the public health arena, the attack that climate scientists like me, find ourselves under. There are sort of some actors in common. Some of the same forces behind anti-science and the attacks on us are the same. The tactics are very similar. And one of the things that we get into is that while climate change and sort of novel pandemics, these new deadly pandemics, are both existential threats to humanity, an even greater existential threat is anti-science misinformation, disinformation, because it undermines our ability to address either of these existential threats.
Well, and we're seeing this play out. Right? I mean, even just a couple of days ago, Robert Kennedy, you know, overseeing now this return of measles and this galloping spread of measles. You're a scientist, you understand these things can grow exponentially, not just arithmetically, right? We're starting to see that happen in the spread in Texas. Claimed in a public setting that this was just a normal outbreak, no biggie, basically, or the person in charge of public health in the United States said, which was to your exact point about this sort of denial of the realities of these things. And it was shocking to me. I mean, I maybe not shocking to me. We all understand, but he's in the government now. And so bring us up to present day. I mean, what we're seeing is now, you were warning about this before Trump came in. We now see what is this extraordinary attack on the scientific and academic community in the United States. I think breathtaking, probably even greater in scope and scale. I mean, the NIH website went down this weekend. It no longer exists,
Yeah.
I mean, apparently, right? Talk a little bit about how we should understand what we're seeing today.
Yeah, and the latest development is that RFK Jr. has actually now told these people that they should take the measles vaccine. I think there's a recognition of what they've unleashed. They've let the horse out of the barn, and it's really too late because their base, their followers, buy into the anti-science messaging to the point that even if RFK Jr. now tries to sort of back off a bit because of the rightful criticism that he's under now, as measles spreads throughout Texas. It's too late. They have already weaponized their followers, their base, against meaningful public health measures to deal with COVID-19 and against sort of any sort of support for moving away from fossil fuel energy to clean energy. And so there is this massive infrastructure. RFK Jr. is part of it. Those who promote the misinformation and disinformation to their followers on social media, on podcasts. Joe Rogan, somebody we talk about quite a bit in the book. So there's this sort of ecosystem. Some of them actually profit because they sell false cures, right? Ivermectin, what have you. And so some of those who are spreading the misinformation, disinformation, they actually profit directly from it. But it also plays to an underlying ideological stance that's been taken by the right. The Koch brothers, other sort of plutocrats who have funded and created this massive misinformation infrastructure with dark money, with various organizations and front groups that they've created and have now sort of bought politicians who sort of do their bidding. We have this massive infrastructure now to promote misinformation and disinformation in the realm of science. And, they now are in control of our government. And we're seeing this just yesterday. I'm sure you wrote about this development, that the Trump administration has now basically deactivated their program for the defense against Russian cyber warfare. It's unilateral disarmament in this information war that we face today against bad actors like Russia, who incidentally have spread misinformation about COVID-19. And of course, they are one of the most significant forces behind climate denial and delay today because they want to monetize their fossil fuels. And part of their one of the underlying motives for their effort to interfere in the elections of other countries and the affairs of other countries is to basically end the transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy because it hurts their economic bottom line. And of course, other bad state actors like Saudi Arabia have worked closely with them. Elon Musk has basically turned over the public square to them. I think part of the reason that Saudi Arabia and Russia both helped finance Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter was so that they could use it as a medium for promoting their misinformation, their disinformation, their narrative. And that's what we're dealing with now. They seem to be in control of our government and the policies of our government. And they are in the process of completely dismantling our scientific infrastructure. NSF has been told that they are likely to see massive layoffs of more than 30% of their workers, something like I think a 60 or 70% reduction in their budget. We've seen NIH, of course, massive cuts in NIH. What I sometimes ask myself is if a foreign adversary like Vladimir Putin were to seize control of the US government and do everything he could to dismantle it, how would it look any different from what we're seeing play out right now?
Well, and this is something that I've been raising in my writing and public commentary. And as somebody who was involved in, and people forget this, but in 2016, the attack on the Democratic Party by the Russian government, right, which was an attack on the Democratic Party and our candidate and our campaign and the DNC. I was brought in by Donna Brazil, who became the new chair after our chair had to resign at the convention, to help go through the wreckage of what had happened to the Democratic Party in 2016. And for those watching this who are Democrats and who are part of the pro-democracy movement, we have to remember that Russia attacked us, right? It was in 2016 on behalf of Trump, and it was a devastating attack. The DNC lost extraordinary amounts of capacity right before the election.
Yeah.
They decapitated the most important political force on opposing Trump and weakened our campaign. And in my mind, it's always was enough to have been determine the outcome of the election. And the reason I raise this is that, what we're seeing now, to your point, Dr. Mann, is that I think this notion that Trump is working with Putin abroad, but here at home he has some other agenda that's unconnected from Putin's agenda is absurd.
Yeah.
He showed servility, and obedience to Putin in a profound and unsettling way. And that, the question of whether or not the United States is literally under attack by Russia right now or being disassembled by somebody who's been thinking about how to do this for decades, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
finally came in with a willing partner, Elon Musk, to sort of have this rapid disassembly
Yeah.
of the United States and all the things, yeah, that has made us prosperous, successful, free, and the envy of the world. And I think this is where the reason I wanted you to come on,
It's a rapid planned disassembly in this case.
yeah, planned disassembly. And I think the reason I wanted you to come on is that I think that this notion that they are just shrinking the government or making things more efficient, as opposed to ripping it to pieces and dissembling things, breaking things that are going to be very, very hard to put together for a long time, is not adequately in our discourse right now, right? I mean, that this notion that they're just trying to cut and do things around the edges and kind of make things better is still kind of in the popular language and discourse. And
Yeah.
we need to, part of the reason I wanted you to come on is that I think we have to far more aggressively challenge this
Yeah.
in order to help the American people understand that they're breaking things that aren't theirs, they're
Yeah.
ours,
Yeah.
and that they're going to be very, very difficult to put back together. And there
That's
is
right.
no logic
That's right.
of doing this if you're a patriot and you believe in America first. If you believe in Russia first, then all this makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely. I mean, we have led the world when it comes to science and technology for many decades, right? And it's led to the prosperity that we have all benefited from in this country. And they are undermining that right now. The massive assault on our scientific infrastructure, on our ability to, develop and advance new technologies in a world where that's going to determine who succeeds and who fails. And China right now is looking at this and they're smiling as well because in terms of their international competitiveness, this is going to be a boon to them. This is going to be a boon to essentially every other major power in the world. The fact that the US, the historical leader in the world of science and technology, is now watching its capacity to advance science and technology, as you say, literally being disassembled in real time. And there will be a permanent impact, right? Once that damage is done, once you've created sort of an environment of uncertainty, young people are no longer going to pursue careers in science. There's going to be a generational impact that we will not be able to recover from the actions that this administration is taking right now. Again, to literally dismantle our entire capacity to to do basic scientific research and to develop new technology in a world where the winners are going to be the ones who are able to develop and bring to market the new technologies that address the great challenges that we face in the world.
I was involved in creating the link between the Democratic Party and Silicon Valley back in the 1990s. And every conference that I held there, including ones chaired by Mark Andreessen and by some of the actors that we're now watching, started with this basic premise that the federal government's R&D agenda was the central reason that Silicon Valley existed.
That's
that
right.
they were there to commercialize and to take advantage of the public research that we were funding at Berkeley and other places.
Stanford. I'm a
Stanford, yeah,
Berkeley grad, but
yeah.
I will admit that Stanford has played a very important role here.
And MIT, and just go through the long list, right, of amazing academic, one of the great crown jewels of American society
Absolutely,
is our higher ed system. It's the
absolutely.
envy of the world, right? I mean, this is an area that, frankly, China, for example, has really struggled with, to be honest, right? I mean, in terms of catching up with us.
And Peter,
And,
Peter Hotez, my co-author, got his degree from Rockefeller University. Literally is sort of the
yeah,
legacy of the sort of the the legacy of the contributions from leaders in the business community that helped establish this entire infrastructure.
right. And what was amazing to me is to watch people from Silicon Valley now who for decades talked about the centrality of this investment that we make here, this unprecedented investment in public knowledge and public information as being the central reason we had the tech revolution in the United States. To be the ones tearing it all down
Yeah.
is just an extraordinary thing for somebody who, was a champion of this world in the early days to see this come back and bite us. And I think if you could be speaking right now to
Yeah.
our Democratic leaders and you were in a room sitting down with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would look, we are under assault from a war that is being fought within our walls. The enemy is within our walls, I would say. And we have to recognize that, you know, coming prepared for a knife fight when what you're really dealing with is the equivalent of nuclear, weaponry that is being deployed right now on the part of a hostile adversary, Vladimir Putin, and a party, the Republican Party, that seems to be complicit in his agenda. That's where we are, and trying to sort of make changes at the edges, talking about moving in, changing our language a little bit and how we sort of frame what Democrats are trying to do, what our what our goals are. That's deck chairs on the Titanic. We're the the water has flooded the cabin of the ship, and it's going down. And literally right now, from what I see, many of the Democratic leaders are rearranging the deck chairs, talking about changing our narrative a bit, or our tactics a bit. We've got to call out the Republicans for what they are. They are an existential threat against us, against our children, against our grandchildren, against the future of our country. They are an internal enemy. I don't see any other way to really frame it. They are a domestic, enemy of all that care about democracy, that care about the future of our economy. I hope the business community is recognizing that they are in the midst of destroying our economy right now with the massive layoffs, the massive cuts that are going to propagate through the economy. There's a multiplier effect. It's going to have a devastating consequence on our economy. Where are the business leaders right now who will have no business to conduct if we continue on this course? And so it's an all hands on deck situation. We are under attack, and we have to be responding in that mode rather than talking about sort of tinkering at the edges, which is a lot of what I'm continuing to see in the messaging I'm seeing from some of the Democratic leaders.
I think that the question, the way that you put this together and the way you argued this is indisputable after what we saw in the last few days and the humiliation of Zelensky. I mean, and I will tell you, Dr. Mann,
I can't believe that I've lived to see something like what was on display yesterday.
or the fact that there was a meeting that took place this weekend in London of democratic nations talking about the future of the free world that the United States was not part of. And these are meetings that we've been leading for over 100 years.
I
And
think the EU, actually, the leaders of the EU said something to the effect that they're now treating the US as an adversary.
Yeah. And I think that part of what motivates me is that I have three children who are 19 and 22 and 24. And I think about what their lives are going to be like if this somehow we don't stop the madness here, and how the world they'll be growing up in will be one where Americans will be seen in a hostile manner and as betrayed the people of the world, the freedom-loving people of the world, rather than enabled it. And
Yeah.
our economy will not have the same kind of drivers of prosperity that it had, so their opportunities will be lessened. My daughter, who's 19 at USC, wants to be a doctor, and the reality is that her ability to become a doctor is now being attenuated and challenged because of the cutting of the NIH and all the funding that's going into medical research and pushing this forward. And I think that part of what I'm trying to convey at Hopium without, you know, uh, finding the appropriate emotional tone about all this is to create a greater sense of urgency that yes, and the way I described it a couple of days ago was that we need to open up a second front. The front that we've opened up politically and from a communication standpoint on the economy, on Medicaid, on prices has been successful. Trump's numbers are going down. There is clear understanding in the public now that Trump means higher prices and greater struggle for working people. This is baked into the cake. Now we have to open up the second front, which is about this Doge and Musk
Yeah.
attack
Yeah.
on our government and our ability to keep ourselves safe, right? I think that's going to be another area because part of what you're getting at here in this article that I reached out to you about originally is that the whole idea of safety and security is changing now. Can you talk a little bit about that, going back to the premise of this work that you did with Dr. Hotez?
Sure. I mean, we have these existential threats that we now face in the form of climate change, the devastating wildfires out west, the flooding events with these storms that we saw on the East Coast this last hurricane season. We are witnessing, many, of these billions of dollars disasters, and we don't call them natural disasters anymore because these are disasters that have been amplified by the warming of the planet, which puts more energy into the atmosphere, which dries out our soils in the summer. That combines with the drought and the heat gives us those wildfires out west, these stronger storms with more moisture in the atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture, so you get even bigger flooding events. And Hurricane Helene, there were hundreds of people who died from the floods in the Appalachians associated with that storm. There was a study that came out shortly thereafter that showed that climate change had increased the flooding by about 50% in magnitude. So this isn't a subtle impact that climate change is having anymore. It's not some small sort of modifying impact. It is fundamentally changing and amplifying these extreme weather events, and that has a huge toll on our economy. It has a toll on human life. COVID-19, of course, hundreds of thousands of Americans died from the failure of the Trump administration at the time to take the actions necessary to mitigate that disaster. And we're only going to see more and more of these novel pandemics as the factors that help create them, which is sort of ecosystem destruction, climate change, which is actually causing bat populations to migrate in ways that lead them to come into contact with human beings in a way that didn't happen before. So climate change itself is helping create the conditions that lead to these novel pandemics. There's an interaction between these two crises, and misinformation and disinformation that's been weaponized by Republicans, the Trump administration, bad foreign actors like Saudi Arabia and Russia, makes all of this worse because our entire infrastructure for dealing with the climate crisis is basically evaporating, right? The current administration is dissolving the programs that had been put in place by both Democratic and even some former Republican administrations to help transition us away from fossil fuel energy towards renewable energy. So they've dismantled our infrastructure for developing vaccines, the massive cuts at the NIH, the change in the agenda of the NIH, moving in direction of sort of anti-science, of COVID, of vaccine denial, anti-vax sort of sentiment. All of these things are happening right now. They're amplified by the misinformation and disinformation, and they would be a massive challenge even without it. The climate crisis is an existential threat on its own. Novel pandemics like COVID-19, and we're going to see more and worse examples of these in the future, are an existential threat, threat on their own. And they are made that much more challenging by the fact that misinformation and disinformation and anti-science in the form of this current administration is being used basically to prevent us from taking the needed actions. It's a perfect storm if ever there were one, and we should see it that way. This is a threat to human civilization. We are in the midst of the greatest threat to human civilization that we have faced. We have to recognize that. And we have to use tactics that meet that moment, that meet that challenge.
Yeah. Just as a point of information, because I've studied mis and disinformation quite a bit, starting with that attack on the Democratic Party in 2016. But it's been documented that the very first major social media campaign that Russia launched into the United States was anti-vax, and that they have been among the most profound promoters of the anti-vax sentiment since they began that campaign back in 2013, 2014. Prior to Trump running, they had tested some of their tactics in building the anti-vax movement in that period, and also in climate. I mean, Kate Starbird, Kate Starbird has done a great job at documenting the early social media campaigns around the Deepwater Horizon disaster that Russia, played a major role in creating global disinformation around that, hurting the American response to a climate disaster. And, so this is all things that have been known, right? I mean, Dr. Mann is a scientist. He's not a polemicist, right? And we deal in the knowns, and these are known things that Russia has been a great promoter of all the anti-science work, movement that he's describing in this.
Well, I experienced it firsthand, Simon, back in 2009, the so-called Climate Gate.
That's right. That's right.
This was a test run for what we saw deployed in 2016. WikiLeaks, the involvement of WikiLeaks, stolen emails that were used, in this case, not to discredit a presidential candidate, but to discredit climate scientists like myself, including myself. I was part of that. This was a campaign to discredit the science of climate change. Going into the Copenhagen summit of 2009, which was the first opportunity for meaningful progress on climate. And, Russia, as I said, has a vested interest in our current reliance on fossil fuels, because that is their single greatest economic asset. It's the one great asset that they can monetize. And they see climate action as an existential threat. And we see Russia's hands all over ClimateGate now. In retrospect, when we look at who the players were and what the tactics were, it was Russia. It was Russia, and some involvement by Saudi Arabia and bad actors like Rupert Murdoch. News Corp, which was second oldest stakeholder in News Corp, was actually the Saudi royal family at the time. So a small number of bad actors, and obviously in the case of Murdoch, weaponizing his media empire to help literally to serve as a megaphone for the spread of the misinformation and to create this pseudo scandal, ClimateGate, that probably had a very consequential impact early on when we had a chance to make meaningful progress on climate. In fact, the Saudi Arabian delegate showed up to the Conference of the Parties in Copenhagen, and said that these stolen emails and what's revealed by these stolen emails, and there was nothing in those emails that actually revealed any scientific impropriety at all. What it was like, taking words like a trick, which is a clever way to solve a problem in science, and using that to make it sound like scientists had fabricated the entire science of climate change. Saudi Arabian delegate, first words out of his mouth were that these stolen emails fundamentally call into question these proceedings, and they are going to have a profound impact on what happens here in Copenhagen. So it was all planned out, and we know that Russia was a major part of that. And we see the makings of the campaigns that they would deploy later.
So listen, I know you got to run, and I want to say thank you. And listen, I hope our viewers and listeners today will recognize this, is that this is all about a call to arms, right? I mean, that we all live and are blessed here in America to live in the most remarkable country in the history of the world. We are the America of the four freedoms. And the way I describe it, Dr. Mann, is that the America of the four freedoms is under attack right now, and which is the global rules-based order abroad and our constitutional order here at home. And that, it is time now for our leaders to recognize the gravity of this moment and to start developing a response that is commensurate with the threat. And I think we're not there yet. I think we're making progress. It is, our leaders are, but our job here in the Hopium community, the hundreds of thousands of us in this community, is to make sure that we are letting our elected leaders know what is required of them now. And that is our job. And our contacting the offices and our showing up, our calling them, or showing up at town hall meetings, the teletown halls and everything else. What we've been doing in our community is we've not been just twiddling our thumbs or going into a ball in the corner. We've been putting our head down and going to work for our democracy every day, because I think that our job is to help, old dogs learn new tricks, so to speak. We need to help our elected leaders understand that they're not just legislators and executives, but they're also influencers and communicators and leaders now of an opposition movement that is here to ensure that this democracy prevails at the end of the day. The stakes of this are very high. Dr. Mann, thank you for your incredibly spirited, articulate leadership under difficult circumstances. And let's stay in touch, and good luck in all of your important work.
Well, thank you, Simon. Thanks for all that you do. And I'm happy to come back and talk anytime.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.